Now, one of the first things I ever learned about the Toyota Camry is when I was reading about it in Jeremy Clarkson's book, where he described it as a cure for insomnia. However, that was written a few years ago, and this current generation Toyota Camry I don't think really reflects that anymore. And instead of just being a boring car, I think it's a cure for insomnia for how comfortable this thing is. Now, I've spent more time in the back seat of this car, and I've actually never driven a Camry up until this review. So it's a weird way to start this for the fact that I've only spent time in the back seat of one of these things, because they're a very popular rideshare car. But what I think is really interesting is that since Toyota created Lexus, this feels like it's more of a budget Lexus than it does a higher spec Toyota Camry. It has heaps of luxurious features, it's really nicely fitted out, and it actually is an extremely comfortable ride, especially here in this top spec. But let me break down what makes the Toyota Camry so good. So this current generation Camry is called the XV70. It was launched in 2017, it got a facelift to what it looks like now, but we don't know what the future of the Camry looks like just yet, because global sales peaked around 2007 and they've been declining ever since because SUVs are just more popular cars than sedans. And the same thing is happening here in Australia with sales of the Camry. And so much so, over in Japan, Toyota said they're not going to sell a Camry in Japan anymore past 2023. So the word Camry comes from the Japanese word kamuri, which basically means crown, and that's how Toyota got all of its naming scheme for its cars at the time, like the Toyota Crown, the Corolla, and yes, the Camry. Now in 1989, there was the Lexus ES, which proved that the Camry could be a luxurious car, but instead it got a Lexus badge and it was called the Lexus ES. So pricing for the Camry here in Australia starts off at $38,774 for the cheapest possible car you could buy. Now this top of the range SL model, which is a hybrid, starts off at $55,500 drive away for this car in this blue metallic paint. Now what are you getting? We're getting these LED lights, you're getting these like gloss black accents at the front, and of course you're getting that blue Toyota badge at the front to let everyone know that you are driving a hybrid Camry. You get a fake vent here, you get silver down the bottom of the bumper, and I'm actually a big fan of how the Toyota Camry looks, so much so that they actually race this thing in NASCAR. Well, it's not quite a Camry that's just have a V8 put into it, but it does look quite cool when it's turned into a race car. But even as a road car, I think it looks pretty good in its current generation. But what is disappointing is that we don't get a TRD version, which the States gets, which is a far more aggressive version of the Camry, but we only get this tame hybrid version as our top of the range model. Now this SL model gets 18-inch wheels in this dual tone color. If you want the better looking wheels, you have to go for the SX, which is the model below this, and that also gets a sports suspension tune, where this doesn't get that because it's meant to be the more luxurious version of the Camry. You get a hybrid badge here, and I do like the look of this car from the side. I like the chrome accents around the windows. I don't mind the gloss black plastic here. You do have keyless locking, and unlocking the side skirts look quite good as well. And in this blue paint, I have actually never seen a Camry like this because they're usually in pretty bland colors like black or white. But here in this blue, it really shows off just how good looking the Camry got. I mean, you wouldn't expect me to say this if you asked me what a Camry would look like 10 years ago. I'd be like, no, no thanks. But this current generation of the Camry, I'm quite a big fan of, to be honest. But yes, there is more fake vents happening back here, so at least you know that the Camry and the Toyota Supra are related, because they love using fake vents like this trim piece back here. Now if you want to be proud of the fact that you bought the updated Camry, you have to show off people your tail lights, because the pre-facelift model did not get these nicer tail lights. You just got a Camry badge back here, you got another blue Toyota badge, you got an SL badge to let everyone know that you bought the top spec Toyota Camry. But here's the thing, see these pipes down here? Yeah, they look fine, but even on this top spec, we don't get the quad exhaust option that other markets get anymore. We used to get it, but now we don't. So there's this weird gap on the other side of the bumper where you would expect the quad pipes to go, but we just don't get it. But if you do want to, there are plenty of aftermarket options there. And you also do get this little boot lip spoiler, which is tacked on here, which actually doesn't look too bad either. I kind of like it a lot. And you do have a traditional trunk opening like you would expect on a Toyota Camry, which pops open like this, and you can even pop it from the inside. And in here we have a ginormous amount of space, which makes the Camry a very popular car for taxis and rideshare, because your suitcases are going to get in here no problem. And there's even a spare tire underneath here. And if you need to fold the seats down, you can just pull on these tabs and it'll push the second row flat, so you can put things all the way through. But here's the thing, SUVs are more popular, they have a big hatch opening, so it seems like you can fit things in there easier. Even though this has a cavernous amount of space, people just want to fit big items in the back, and this opening here can be limiting for some of those items. Oh, this feels far more familiar than driving this thing. I'm here in the back seat of a Toyota Toyota Camry, which is pretty much the Uber car of choice. We do have 2 air vents back here, and in this new updated model, we have 2 USB-C ports back here, which is quite nice, and we have some very basic map pockets. We also have the center armrest, which you can fold down like this. I have my own lights above me as well. There's a pretty large transmission and exhaust tunnel here, so it's not going to be a good place to sit if you want to sit in the middle seat, but you do have some child seat supports back here for your ISOFIX points, which are hidden behind some plastic tabs. You do have a little bit of storage here in the doors, and your windows are pretty large here in the back to let in plenty of light. What's also cool in this top spec SL model is that you get this large glass roof. There is a big black partition that sort of goes through the middle of it, which is like a support beam there, but nonetheless, it's letting in extra light that you normally don't get inside a Camry. Now my feet room's okay, and I have okay amounts of knee room, and my headroom's all right too. So for a mid-sized sedan, it is pretty comfortable. But I mean, this is the thing, right? If you sit in an SUV, you'll feel like you have more space because of the upright positioning of everything. Where here, it's a little bit more laid back, but it doesn't mean that it's uncomfortable. I feel like I could cruise around here, as I have many times, just fine. Now, I've actually never sat in the front seat of a Camry to drive one, which has been pretty surreal. So I was actually really pleasantly surprised. The materials up here are very nice. There's gloss black plastic up here, but it's not too bad because it's not in major touch points, and that's quite good because it's used here to sort of make this feel a little bit more luxurious. I like this trim piece that runs across. It's got like scoring in it, and it also has a little light in there as well at night. Just feels a little bit more special than a normal Camry. I've also got JBL speakers in here and a massive speaker at the back, so this thing has been pretty good to listen to music in. Now this screen here is pretty rudimentary compared to the newer screens that Toyota's rolling out, so hopefully this gets an update soon, but this has been fine for things like Apple CarPlay. And you actually do have real stitching that runs through the dashboard here. Now we have a 12-volt socket and a USB type A port up front, but no wireless phone charging, but you do have a little pad to sort of store things. You have cup holders, you have heated and ventilated front seats in these leather accented seats, which are really quite nice. And we have more stitching around this center cubby, which has actually been quite spacious. I like this little setup here for your drive modes, your EV mode, and also your shifter looks quite good as well. Now this steering wheel looks and feels just like a normal Toyota steering wheel with paddles on them, but you do have electronically adjustable controls for your steering column, which is pretty advanced, and it's also memory set as well with these electronic seats, which also has electronic adjustment for the passenger side, which you don't usually see on, say, like an SUV at this price point like I saw on the Toyota Corolla Cross. Now we do have analog gauges. On the left you have your traditional Toyota hybrid gauge, which shows you when you're charging a battery, you're in eco mode, you're in power mode, so it's not a traditional rev gauge, but on the right you have a traditional analog speedometer. And in the middle we do have a screen that runs you through a bunch of information like your media controls, your trip information, and just basic information about the car, but it's not too advanced and it's a little bit laggy, so I sort of prefer the full digital one that you get on newer Toyota hybrid models. Now overall, I love the driving position here, but you are very close to the roof if you're a taller passenger, which is a bit odd, but I do like the floor mounted accelerator. I like how low the window sills are, so you feel like you can really look out, and the blind spots are pretty much minimal except for the C-pillar. You do have plenty of visibility across the side of this car, so that's quite good, and you can see why a lot of people are happy to spend lots and lots of hours behind the wheel of a Toyota Camry, because they're just very comfortable. And we also do have a heads-up display, but it's a bit dim if you ask me, and also it doesn't really work if you wear polarized sunglasses, so I haven't been really using it as much. It works well at night though. That's when I've been using it the most. And we also do have an auto dimming rear vision mirror here too. And yes, this glass roof does open to give you a bit more of an open air experience inside your Camry. But the luxurious fit out of this interior for this top spec model isn't just the only luxurious thing about this car. The sound isolation and quietness this thing provides is unreal. So when you start up the Camry, it starts up at complete silence, which I love about Toyota's hybrids. It's just so luxurious and just so nice, especially when you have to commit to an electric car. You can still get that experience here in a Toyota Camry hybrid. Now, here's the power. You're getting 219 kilowatts, which is 297 horsepower, and 221 newton meters of torque from a 2.5 litre naturally aspirated petrol 4-cylinder motor paired up to an electric powertrain. Now, this thing is front wheel drive. It has a 6-speed CVT transmission, and I mean 6-speed because it has 6 simulated gears. Now, let's take off in reverse, and you can see here the engine hasn't even started up yet, which is awesome. I just love this sort of electric cruising, but it's quickly interrupted usually by the petrol motor kicking in. But the thing is, the interruption is not harsh. It's really quite gradual and smooth and buttery, and that's why I think Toyota make the best hybrids in the game right now. And it's a clear reason why is because they've spent the most amount of R&D on perfecting it. They've had one of the most amounts of time out of any manufacturer to build a perfected hybrid powertrain, which they've now just transplanted into all their popular cars like the Camry. Now what's interesting is that yes, this car doesn't get the sports tune suspension, which is available in the SX model below this, but the SL model does get double wishbone rear suspension, which for anyone who knows anything about cars, double wishbone suspension is the preferred suspension if you want to handle better. We do have McPherson struts up front, which is just pretty standard, but yeah, double wishbones in the rear, that's an interesting way to go. So as we get going here, we are in eco mode because this is not a performance car. It is a commuter car that has a luxury edge to it, I would say. Now, going through here, the Camry is just beautifully flat. And that's what you're expecting when you've got a lower sedan. It's mid-size, it's longer than an SUV, and it just does cruising so well. I really love just cruising this thing. I would love to see a two-door version of the Camry, but I guess that's the Lexus RC, which doesn't exist in Australia anymore, thanks to crash safety standards, but it would have been cool to see a two-door Camry with a Toyota badge on it. I think that would be quite awesome. Now, pickup in this thing is actually pretty good. Now, we have nearly 300 horsepower, so it's not going to be a slow car. And that means you can sort of put your foot down and really just get to where you need to be. It's not going to be a performance car, and no, it's not going to be the old Camry V6s, which were surprisingly quick, but this thing is just a competent car. It's got an adequate amount of power, and I'll shift us into normal mode to get a better feel of the car, which I drive around in pretty much all the time. I don't really find myself needing to jump into eco or sport. And here we are sort of cruising around this corner, getting a bit more, finding the edge there. Yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely not a performance car, but that double wishbone rear does help that back carry through a corner a bit easier. And the interior of the car is really quite stable. Now here's the thing, when you separate the boot compartment from the cabin, you get a quieter cabin experience. Like, it's just so quiet in here. I can have a normal conversation with you because that 4-cylinder motor is hardly working away. That hybrid powertrain is just completely silent, and it's a very quiet car, very comfortable. Now my visibility is great outside this car. I love it. I love the seating position here as well. I feel like I'm in command. I don't really feel like I'm sitting low down in the car, but that's not the purpose of this thing, so I'm not really chasing that feeling. Those 18-inch wheels are a little bit bouncy on some corners, like you can sort of pick up a few bits and pieces from the road, but ultimately it's pretty flat and pretty smooth. And then in terms of any sort of exterior noise, the tire noise is really the only thing you're gonna notice the most. Now some drivers of this car I've sat in the back of, they really just stab the throttle and just try and get it into that power band, but you don't need to be there. You do have a sport mode here, which sort of livens the car a little bit more to sort of squeeze as much power as you can, and that's where it becomes a little bit quick. The steering firms up here, and you do get yourself a quicker Camry, so if you do want to go through some corners a bit faster, you can, and you can actually somewhat enjoy them, but you would have to get the SX model to really exploit everything the Camry has to offer here in Australia. Now that 6-speed manual transmission I was telling you about, we have these massive paddles here, which are, you know, pretty nice to engage with, and you can sort of shift down some false gears because a CVT transmission is a single gear, but then they've sort of engineered in a sort of gear ratio for 6-speed gears if you want to just sort of hold revs and sort of get higher up in the power band of that 4-cylinder petrol motor, but I don't find that entirely necessary. Now jumping into normal mode, this is where we're cruising around just fine. Now the brakes in this car are pretty good because this car is not that heavy, so if we go for an emergency stop in 3, 2, 1, and brake. It's a very interesting brake pedal because it doesn't lurch forward. It sort of glides to a stop. Like most cars I'm testing are higher off the ground than this thing, but this thing really just has a pillowy brake experience, which means that you can sort of modulate the brake a little bit and you won't be lurching around this cabin all too much. So my fuel consumption here indicated by the car is around 6 litres per 100 Ks, but you can easily see that dip below that when you're driving in the city, but as I've been doing some highway driving, this thing, it has peaked up a little bit, but my indicated fuel range has been just over 600 kilometers at a full tank, which is again, very good for a petrol car as well. So this thing, the Camry, I was really confused on why everyone would go and pick a Camry over everything else, but now I sort of get it. It's a reliable car. It will run for hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Old Camrys prove that fact. They stay together, they piece together well, they're comfortable, they have a nice isolation from the outside world, they have everything you really need, especially in this top spec model when you got ventilated and heated seats up front. And look, as a daily commuter, you really can't go wrong if you want to pick a Camry. But that being said, there's just no flair in here to make your day any more exciting. You have to be in that sort of Japanese executive mindset where you're just doing the job. There's nothing here that needs to be ostentatious or showy, and that's where it clashes with my personality. I kind of like a car that has a sense of occasion, something like a Skoda Octavia RS I adore, and I'm not getting any sort of that sensation here, even on the luxury end of things. That's where I think even I would maybe opt for a Lexus version of this car to try and get something a bit more characterful. But the Toyota Camry isn't aiming to be characterful. It's aiming to fulfill a segment that it does really well in, and that's just something that you have to come to terms with if you love cars. And that's why on my end I go, it'd be cool to see like a TRD version of this car here in Australia, but Toyota Australia probably goes, there's no need. And the turning circle on this thing is really quite good for a larger car like this. And parking is quite easy because you do have a 360-degree parking camera. So the overall driving experience in the Camry has been very pleasant. I've been very comfortable. I feel like I'm in a more luxurious car than I actually am. And look, for the price, I think what you're getting at this top spec model, it's still pretty good. But it's sort of on the other end of things if you're spending the same amount of money on a Skoda Octavia RS, which I'm also reviewing at the same time because that thing is more sporty. It's still luxurious, but it's just got a different edge and a different agenda versus this car, which is just aiming to be a very comfortable commuter car, which it does really, really well. Now, I do think that Clarkson was correct in calling this car a cure for insomnia, and that's not because this car is completely boring anymore. In this modern iteration, it's because it's so comfortable. The way the cabin is isolated from the outside world, the way this thing drives, it's all very plush, but I do think that this thing is getting less and less sales every year because people, one, don't think it's as cool to drive around as a Camry as, say, something like a Skoda Octavia RS, which is similarly priced and a bit more sporting than this thing, and two, people just want SUVs, so this thing is quickly becoming underrated. What's great about this thing is that it sips fuel, it's comfortable on the inside in this top spec, and it really does feel like if you don't want to shell out the cash for a Lexus, you can get a lot of that car here in the Toyota Camry SL. But I think Toyota would really benefit from bringing out a more sporting version of this car to sort of pump up sales a little bit, because I think people wouldn't mind driving around a Camry if it just didn't look so anonymous. And I think this blue finish here is a great example that the Camry doesn't really have to look so boring. Like, it doesn't have to be another white, black or gray sedan out on the road. And if you have been driving higher riding SUVs, the way this thing handles feels like a breath of fresh air, just for the pure fact that it's lower to the ground. But ultimately, the biggest downside for this car is that it is starting to age a little bit with that center screen, that gauge cluster and the rear seat amenities. It just feels like it's becoming a little bit long in the tooth, and that's the biggest question mark for this car, is what will the next one bring? We've seen hints of what Toyota wants to do in the sedan segment with the Toyota Crown sedan, which is like a lifted SUV sedan, which is kind of crazy, and who knows if that comes here to replace this. We don't really know what Toyota's doing in this sedan category, but for now the Camry still represents really good value, it's really good on fuel, and yes, it's still comfortable, and it's clear to see that this is a very reliable way to get around, and also it's very clear to see why people choose this as a rideshare car of choice. Now, thank you for watching this Cameron's Camry review here on Product Review Cars. If you liked it, hit subscribe, and if you want to see more car content, make sure you follow us at Product Review Cars on TikTok and Instagram, and let me know, would you buy a Toyota Camry? Let me know in the comments down below, because I'm sort of umming and ahhing if I actually would. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.